Some go there to bury their dead. Some stay away forever instead. The mountain still calls those who hear and must return to her over and over again. There is something in beauty and in hard work that stays with a woman who has raised 12 children in the clearings and the woods of her beloved Blue Ridge Mountains.
Yes, I love the mountains, and I was born and raised on them, and I was proud of where I was raised at.
She saw the reddest sunsets and the prettiest flowers and the bluest skies from her front porch. Listened to the bird songs. Dried the sweetest apples on the rooftop. Tasted the wildness in the moonshine they sipped at the hootenannies on a full moon.
But they put me in chains, working out in the rain. But I'm free from the chain gang now.
This was a rich life and a strong one, where the folk could avoid being disturbed by what they called the outside world.
They had a freedom that we don't have. They didn't have somebody telling them what to do. They could get up and go. They knew what they had to do to survive.
They saw the mist roll up the ridges and hang in the air until the wind moved beyond. They tended the land and the children and the animals. They gathered the wild cohosh and staghorn sumac from the rich apothecary of the mountains. Found moments of familiar beauty. Found joy and heartache in the lives they had made.
But I can recall the memories and the happiness we had as a family. And that was enjoyed until we were put out by the Shenandoah National Park.
My family had been up there since the 1700s, and there was still beauty when the park system came in. They knew how to preserve it.
But a shadow was coming. The people began to hear rumors that would lead to a day they would have to leave their mountain homes. At first there was confusion. Would they have to leave or get to stay? What was true and what was not?
There is no one truth. There's like 500 different stories. It's a story that is individual to each family who was displaced.
When you begin to consider what it would mean to have that rupture, to be removed from a place that your ancestors had lived in for that long. We have no experience to describe that. We have no way to begin to approximate what that kind of trauma must have felt like. We have no way of being able to tell that story and to find the words to put that story together.
Do these ancient mountains long for the people as they do for her? The Blue Ridge must remember them, or they would not hear her call so insistently.
Even though I wasn't born up there, when I crossed the Blue Ridge Mountains at Swift Run Gap, I get this uplifting sensation. I can't explain it. I feel like I'm part of that.
And even to this day, I feel like my blood is attached to that. And when I go to the mountain, when I go to Big Meadows for a picnic, I feel like I'm kind of home.
Does she remember the bodies of children splashing in her rushing waters? Does she smell the flowers that still bloom in April? Does she still hear music echoing where once a front porch welcomed guests and music in the shadow of a chimney that still stands?
This is a story of colliding passions.
You have the people who are passionate and had that sense of place, and then you had this group of people who just knew that this place would improve lives regionally. Shenandoah National Park was authorized by Congress in 1926. The enabling legislation of Shenandoah National Park says that this will be an eastern park in the Western tradition. The first engineer in charge, which was what the superintendent was called at that time, really saw it as his mandate to establish a natural area and to remove as much as possible any evidence of human interaction with the land. That was his mandate, was to create a natural, in the Western tradition, park here in the East. They started a search for areas that would be appropriate for national parks. George Freeman Pollock was one of the people who saw that announcement, and he and another gentleman who frequented the Skyland Resort saw that and said, why not Skyland?
Sometimes I find it hard to be kind to George Freeman Pollock. He was clearly a very charismatic entrepreneurial type. Pollock very overtly, I think, manipulated and utilized folks in Corbin Hollow for his purposes, because Pollock thought that that was going to be the salvation for Skyland and his business woes and his financial losses. And so it was in his interests to convince people that depopulating a populated landscape in aid of a national park was a good thing to do ethically.
I think the term that I heard from somebody was that the national park wasn't going to be a human zoo, and so they needed to move the people out. The state had been told that they had to acquire the land and give it to the federal government because the Congress wasn't going to appropriate money to buy the land.
President Herbert Hoover, seeking solitude and captivated by the beauty of the mountains and streams of Madison County, used his own money to have a private rustic retreat built on land that would later become part of the new national park.
So during the Hoover administration, when much of the work was being done to acquire the land, the policy was that the people who lived on the property would be able to stay. However, when Roosevelt took office, that administration felt differently about that issue. So at that point, they began talking about relocation.
When the sheriff came calling, I could see the storm coming, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Mr. Roosevelt's coming to put in a parkway, and you notice is given hereby.
The book Hollow Folk had come out in 1933. My grandmother often told me that that was the biggest piece of fiction that she had ever read regarding the mountain people.
And when they portrayed those people that way, it made it so much easier for the government to come in and say, yeah, we need to have this here. Because these people, they can't survive here, they can't live here. They'll just waste away in this mountain. They don't have any education, they're stupid.
And I know there were some around who may not have been educated, but there were people in the hollows that were very well educated and business people who provided income and livelihood for all these people. When I learned the secret of Sugar Hollow, I returned home to tell my father that I'd found out some news, and the eyeballs lit up and we started venturing into Sugar Hollow, and I learned the history of my family. When I got to return to the hollow and I got to find out who I was never so proud in my life. To walk down through that hollow and see what I had, I was mad. I was mad. I was mad.
Back in the late 1700s, the Woods came to this area and brought forth a different life on this mountain.
And so Joe Wood built his house right on Jarman's Gap Road. You have to pass Joe Wood's house to go to Jarman's Gap. And so all the sugar came into Sugar Hollow to make brandy, because that's what they brewed. And so when Prohibition comes along, Joe Wood's going to have a hard time giving up making alcohol. They're going to go into the moonshine business.
There's a an artist that has a statue in the Smithsonian. He was born on top of the mountain. He died on top of the mountain. William Barbee was the artist. He was probably one of the most famous artists in America, and his statue can be seen on the 3rd floor in the Smithsonian.
The Blue Ridge Mountains were filled with Native Americans for thousands of years. And by that I mean small groups, family groups, extended family groups who would come to the mountains on a seasonal basis. The earliest sites that we have in the Blue Ridge are about 13,000 years old. There were over 400 generations of Native Americans who lived in the Blue Ridge. Over 400 generations of Native people.
Our country was founded on displacement. So the group in power describes a group of people in a particular or dehumanizing way, and then that makes it easier to then persuade the larger public that those people should be moved. And so that happened with the American Indians, it happened with these white settlers who lived in Shenandoah National Park, it happens today.
The displaced, that's what they called us. The displaced people of the mountain. I said, no, they wasn't displaced, they were disregarded.
You know, there were surveys done of people and lists made of who was going to be effectively incarcerated after removal, and that involved sterilization. If you lived in a way that a survey taker didn't like, perhaps you weren't married and you had children, well, then you're feeble-minded. You don't deserve to be, you need to be taken care of in certain ways. One is sterilization so that you don't have any more children, and another might be being put into the asylum.
Assessments of land and property were made in the 8 Virginia counties where land for the park was to be taken. Landowners were to be compensated in Depression-era dollars.
And those people who were deemed a good risk were given an opportunity by the Resettlement Administration. The Resettlement Administration built 7 communities in areas adjacent to the park. There was a house and a barn, and these people were offered this opportunity to move there. The whole resettlement project was wildly unsuccessful.
Some would go willingly. Some fought valiantly to hold on to their mountain homes and heritage.
My sister and I were playing in the backyard when I heard my mother scream, "The park people are coming, the park people are coming." She was frightened. She was scared, not knowing what would happen.
Ken Shiflett was just a young boy when the Shiflett family was ordered to leave their Simmons Gap home place.
December the 5th, 1935, the agents returned and informed my parents, my mother and father, and I heard this: if you don't move by tomorrow, you'll be set in the road. 2 days after we moved, my father and my brother went back to get the remaining household items, and the house had been burned to the ground. Nothing remained. All of the buildings, the barn, the chicken house, the hog house, the granary, they were all burned. Nothing but ashes left.
I wish to call your attention to this sad fact. If I'm compelled to abide by this so-called permit, my wife and our little 4-year-old baby boy and myself will have to face the cold, dark world with nowhere to go. I am an American-born citizen, also law-abiding, but owing to ill health and other misfortunes, I'm left in a very poor condition. The anguish that you can hear in the letters is an anguish that has been passed down to generations.
Melanchthon, Merle, and Carrie Kleiser lived in a 7-room house on 46 acres near Thornton Gap. The Kleisers ran a gas station and a diner where locals enjoyed Carrie's 10 cents a slice huckleberry pie. Kleiser defied the eviction orders, locked himself in his house. The sheriff threatened to use tear gas. Kleiser would not relent. "I am a Republican," he wrote, "but not the kind that favors a condemnation law that drives widows and orphans or anybody else from home with nowhere to go and nothing to go with." Armed with a court order, Page County Sheriff E.L. Lucas and his deputies surprised Melanchthon near the gas pumps. All of Kleiser's properties were torn down. Leslie Florence Cave Jenkins and her husband Walker were raising 7 children on Tanner's Ridge. Leslie was stubborn, religious, and pregnant.
I tried and I pleaded to convince my dear Leslie we should move to the valley below. But she stood hard as bedrock with her eyes full of fury and said the mountain is our only home. And so she sat in her rocking chair and wouldn't be moved from the place. She sat there, and she even then still felt like she was going to be saved somehow. The family was going to be able to stay. But they ended up carrying her in the rocking chair, and that's the iconic photo that somebody thankfully took, because it really is the photo that captures the pain of all the families, everybody that had to leave. She was heavy with child and as firm as the mountain. She refused to be moved from our place. You could hear her a-crying all the way to Dark Holler when they carried sweet Leslie away. You could hear her a-crying all the way to Dark Holler when they carried sweet Leslie away.
When her days on Earth ended, Leslie was carried back home to Tanner's Ridge. Leaving the land, they left behind artifacts of their lives, remains of a submarine still, a cabin in the woods near the Upper Poquoson Mission, now falling into ruins. Stones carried and placed by hand. A rusting car sinking into the soil. Taking with them the things they could carry. Taking with them powerful memories and life stories.
Mom called this a sheep nose fruit jar. It came off the mountain in 1933.
My mother would take food down to the Spotswood Trail, and they had excess food, and it would usually be cornbread. Everybody had leftover cornbread and milk and butter, and they'd put it in a spring with a sign. And then during the Depression, people were walking through the mountains, and they would see that sign, and they would eat that food, of course.
The people that lived on the mountains, including my great-grandparents, had no idea that there was any kind of a depression going on. I remember my grandmother telling me this story, and she's like, yeah, you know, we heard people talking about a depression. We didn't even really know what that meant. It was, for us, everything was hard.
When my grandfather met my grandmother, Louise Wood, he used to come down to Blue Hole in Sugar Hollow all the time. My grandmother fell into the Blue Hole. And her sister jumped in after, and neither one could swim. And he jumped in after him. Swore he was going to marry her, and he did.
And he came home one night, and he was scalped around the sides of his head, and it was all gapped up. And my mother said, "What happens? I know you didn't request a haircut like that." And he said, "Well," said, "we ran out of hair before we ran out of conversation."
So Uncle Tommy decided he was going to baptize this old rooster that morning. He caught the old rooster up, you know, and got the old rooster by both feet and put his right hand around the old rooster's neck, held old rooster's head underneath the water. He said, "Rooster, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son, and of the, he couldn't think of Holy Ghost, so he drowned his rooster.
Young men hired in the New Deal Civilian Conservation Corps came to the mountains. They would develop overlooks and hiking trails, build cabins and campgrounds. They earned $30 a month and were required to send most of that money home to their families. Local residents were put to work building the 105 miles of the Skyline Drive.
I'm very glad to come back to Virginia.
July 3rd, 1936. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt dedicates Shenandoah National Park.
In bygone years, we have seen the terrible tragedy of our age, the tragedy of waste, waste of our people, waste of our land. That was the compelling reason that led us to put our idle people to the task of ending the waste of our land.
Disparaging and derogatory portrayals of the mountain people and their way of life did not sit well with many descendants of those who were evicted. One of the descendants created the group Children of Shenandoah to encourage the telling of a more inclusive truth.
My mom was actually born inside of what is now Shenandoah National Park. And my grandparents was the ones who got eviction orders, Octavie Shiflett and Bertie Shiflett. I was tired of the people who used to live in what is now Shenandoah National Park being bad-mouthed, being put down in public media, in Shenandoah National Park media at that time.
The people that were involved with Children of Shenandoah were very driven. They were motivated to make this happen. You know, there was a lot of anger on the part of many people, but some people took that anger and channeled it in constructive ways.
My mother did not like this idea at all. It was like a subject I didn't want to talk about, because whenever I wanted to find out why we left the mountains, she just got real quiet and she almost looked like she was about to cry. And so I didn't want to keep bringing it up, but yet as a young girl there was just this desperate desire in my heart to know more about when my family lived in the mountains and why they left the mountains.
If somebody came here today and told me, Mr. Lamb, we're going to take your place, well, he would have a fight on his hands. And so I don't have the anger, but I can understand why they do.
I don't think any of these folks want to be seen as victims. I don't think they want to be seen as people to whom something happened and they could not recover from it. They just want the story to be told. They just want their voice to be heard. They want the objects that were part of their history, the places that were part of their history, to be recognized for what they are. There was something very unique and something very vibrant about that culture that set it apart. They were modern. They were of the modern world.
And at the same time, we were rethinking the exhibit, which by that point was 30 years old, and we were rethinking the park film, which was about the establishment of the park. And so it worked out really well that they could have some input. We had them as a resource to make sure that we got the story right, and that was absolutely invaluable.
We feel that the park is now doing a much better job of portraying the history and everything of the people who used to live there. And then it wasn't until all these years later that the hiker, Bill Henry, started this Blue Ridge Heritage Project. We just knew him as the hiker.
I remember my first time walking through off trail, walking down a little hollow, and I came across a home site and there was a chimney there, and it just like, wow, it just was very powerful. Because at that time I didn't know the story of how the land was acquired. I didn't know about the houses being burned.
After his discovery in the woods, Bill Henry a former teacher, would spend a decade educating himself, finding the legends and the realities of the mountain stories. He then formed the Blue Ridge Heritage Project.
And some there be which have no memorial, who are perished as though they had never been.
With a plan to build a stone monument in each of the 8 counties where only the departed were allowed to remain.
History often takes unpleasant events and sort of brushes it aside, and it takes some groups to come along and say, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to forget this. For myself, I find that when I go someplace new, it's one thing to see what's there and how it's being presented, but if I know something in the background, what's the context of this, what leads up to this, then I'm able to understand better and to have a better appreciation for what I'm seeing.
I've been to memorials all over the world to all kinds of different things. The graveyards in France to World War I and II. I mean, these things are very, very moving when you go there and you realize why they're there. Can't undo the past, but you can honor the memory.
Shadows and stories are made of more than light and dark. They are shaped from the earthy clay of our beings, from grief or anger, which rises from the longing for remembered people, remembered places, remembered times.
Having that built and erected was a culmination to a lot of my thoughts, a lot of my feelings, and in some way it helped come to closure in a way for me.
These memorials are huge for us to get done. We have kiosks with information on them so that people will say, oh, wow, I want to hike to that place. I want to do this. I want to learn that. That's the way the stories continue. That's the way we keep the history of the people that lived in the park alive. And that's what we need to do.
This mortar, this stonework we put together here, this brass plaque is much more than that. It has become a living, breathing item. People now have a place they can come and put to rest any issues they have with the past and fight any demons they may have with the Shenandoah National Park, and realize that we have such a great asset that the park itself is in reality a memorial to our people.
Yesterday, shadows today.
As I was growing up, I constantly heard the story of my grandfather. He was going to go back and get his land on Fraser Mountain. They stole it from me, and I got land there, and I'm going to get it. I put a stone in the chimney. I picked it up. I put it in the monument, and as I did so, a wave of emotions washed over me. I felt the presence of my grandfather there with me. Tears just ran down my face. And as I laid that stone in its spot, all the bitterness and the hatred left me.
Nor death can enter there, and I feel like traveling. I feel like traveling on until that beautiful face I see, and I feel like traveling on. Yes, I feel like traveling, traveling on. I feel like traveling on and on. My heavenly home is bright and fair, and I feel like traveling on.
Some go there to bury their dead. Some stay away forever instead. I will arise and climb my mountain, home to all my hopes and dreams. Memories, heartaches, love and laughter left behind for government schemes. Shadows haunt this moonlit sight. Tears wash over old stones in the night. A grieving heart lets go a cry, longing for home near the stars.